Good day and welcome to this session on single source procurement. By the end of this session, you should be able to explain single source procurement and outline the reasons for using single source procurement, then mention 3 advantages and 3 disadvantages of single source procurement, as well as distinguish single source procurement from sole source procurement. So single source procurement is basically a method of procurement where the organization or the procuring entity uses a single source of supply, and it's characterized by no competition, because in the end the organization deals with one source of supply, or the organization deals with one supplier at the end of the day. So in order to contrast single source and sole sourcing, you could say that single source procurement is a method of procurement where, even though there may be other procuring or there may be other suppliers in the market, the procuring entity decides to single out one supplier and request their goods, works, or services from them. Given the nature of single source procurement, it should be noted that it involves a significant departure from the concept of equal treatment or competition, because in the end, the organization or the procuring entity deals with just a single supplier, and there is no sense of equality. It ignores other competent and available potential suppliers who could have been able to provide the goods, works, or services for the organization. It also departs from principles of transparency, because the organization determines on their own whether the supplier is suitable or not, develop relationships with them or develop supply relationships with them. So sole sourcing should be noted that other suppliers will be available in the market, but the procuring entity decides to single out just one supplier and engage in procurement relationships or procurement negotiations or dealings with that particular supplier. So unlike sole sourcing, where there may be other suitable and equally qualified suppliers in the market, sole sourcing is characterized by monopolistic situations where only one available supplier is competent enough to make available or to provide the goods, works, and services required by the buyer. So sole sourcing situations can be characterized by monopoly, where, assuming, let's take electricity provision in Ghana for instance. ECG is the only provider of electricity in Ghana. So if you are buying electricity and you go to ECG, it means you are engaging in sole sourcing, because there is no other hydroelectric power provider in the country. The other sources of electricity are solar, but if you solely or specifically want hydroelectric power, it is only Electricity Company of Ghana that offers those services. But in single sourcing, assuming your specification is not in terms of hydroelectric power, but your specification is about electricity, it means that we have solar electricity providers, we have hydroelectric power electricity providers, and we have other means of getting electricity. But if you decide to engage in ECG, it means you have ignored competition, you have ignored the capacity of the solar providers and other forms, and decided to engage in just ECG. In that instance, you are engaging in single sourcing. But if there is no other provider of what you want, and it is just one provider, and you decide to engage in relationship with them, it means you are engaging in sole sourcing. So single sourcing, where the organization deals with a single supplier at the end of the day, is done based on several reasons. One of the reasons is that there is only one supplier who is capable or competent enough in the market to provide the goods, works, or services that are required by the procuring entity. Then there is agency. An organization will decide to engage in single sourcing because they do not have time to engage in the pre-qualification and screening exercise and solicitation process that is typical in an open tendering process. So situations where there is a natural disaster and people have lost their lives, you cannot engage in open tendering. So if you want supplies for the injured patients, you just use single sourcing to get the supplies from the most available source. And then security reasons, where the organization, so for instance, if you want to acquire military items like guns, boats, among others, you cannot openly source for these items. You have to use single sourcing where you would identify the available sources of these items, then you engage the suppliers to provide you with these items. Catastrophe is also typical of the agency, where maybe a natural disaster, flood has rendered people incapacitated. So you need a source of accommodation for them, you need food for these victims. It means single sourcing is the ideal method to use because in the end you cannot waste time to solicit tenders from a lot of suppliers, screen them and determine the best tenderer. Single sourcing is the best. Research purposes too is typical for single sourcing because you can't invite tenders from a lot of suppliers as to how you are going to engage in a research approach, the method to be used, the time scale, among others. Each supplier will determine based on what they can, the time limit, the specifications that they can fulfill. So in order to avoid some of these contrasting requirements, you have to engage in single sourcing. Then promotion of policy. So assuming the organization is committed to, let's say, sustainability, and there is only one supplier who provides eco-friendly goods, the organization might decide that they are buying just from that supplier. In that instance, they are promoting their sustainability policy in their or for their organization. Then failed tender, where the open tendering process has failed and then time has been wasted, it may not be wise or advisable to begin another open tendering process, but the ideal might be to consult an identified skilled or qualified supplier to provide the item for you within the shortest possible time. And then standardization, where because of probably having sought for an item previously from a supplier, so let's say you are producing chocolates and assuming the grades of cocoa seeds are different and you first engage in open tendering and you got the cocoa seeds from a given supplier, but maybe the cocoa seeds were not enough for the production of the chocolates, but you want another cocoa seed. Standardization implies that you would want that quality of cocoa seeds that you first got from the open tendering. So in this instance, it wouldn't be wise to, or it wouldn't be advisable to start a new open tendering process, but the advisable approach would be to consult the previously consulted supplier to supply you with, or to continue to supply you with the cocoa seeds that you earlier on used in your process. In this instance, you want standardization of the quality of chocolate that you are producing. So that is also suitable for single sourcing. So it should be noted that if you are using single sourcing because of standardization, you have to consider certain factors. So you have to consider the effectiveness of the original procurement in meeting the needs of the procuring entity. So in the chocolate instance, if the first cocoa was suitable for production of the chocolate, it means that standardization is a more feasible justification for using single sourcing. Then the second one is the limited size of the proposed procurement in relation to the original procurement. So if assuming in the first procurement you requested 10,000 tons, but in the second one you require just thousand tons. It means the costs or the size of the requirement doesn't warrant engaging in open tendering again. So in that instance, procuring single source procurement will be suitable. Then the reasonableness of the price and the unsuitability of alternatives to the goods or services in question. So the advantages of single sourcing is that it is fast since there is no comparison of tenders, and the most suitable supplier is likely chosen since they do not engage with a lot of suppliers, and there is no cost of tendering, or there is lower cost of tendering. Then the entity may negotiate for better delivery and services with the chosen supplier. The disadvantages are that it lacks competition, so you are not able to get access to quality. It can lead to paying higher costs for goods and services because you fail to consider other alternatives. It may lead to corruption and then risks from overdependence on a single supplier. And in Ghana, it can take a lot more time before PPA would give approval because single sourcing is subject to approval by PPA. Conditions to satisfy for single sourcing is that there must be capability and qualification of the proposed firm, and then the conditions of the contract and financial proposal, that is detailed cost of the procurement and demonstration that the proposed cost represents value for money.